He grinned at that judge like the whole thing was already in the bag. The second Dean Whitfield shot a little wink at his own lawyer. Right there in the middle of a family court hearing, I knew deep down that keeping my mouth shut for 3 straight years had been the smartest move of my life. Not a peep out of me. Not one hint about what I knew. Not one word about what I'd already set in motion. He was sitting there in that pressed charcoal suit, the one my daughter had put on a credit card she was still paying off, bless her, leaning back all easy like a man who genuinely believed the world couldn't touch him. His lawyer was cracking up at some little joke like this whole case was a formality. I sat in the gallery watching them and felt nothing honestly, just this calm, steady, ready feeling. The kind you only get when you know something the other guy hasn't got a clue about. My name's Rosalind Aldercott. 63 years old. Spent 29 years running a high school as principal out in Meriden, Connecticut, which means I spent nearly 3 decades watching teenagers lie straight to my face, and I got real good at spotting it coming from 30 feet away. What Dean never saw coming was that I'd been quietly working against him since practically the second week I met the man. My daughter Josephine is 35. She's a physical therapist, patient, sharp-eyed, the type who pours everything she's got into her patients and every once in a while, misses what's happening right under her own roof. After her first marriage fell apart, Josie was pulling 50-hour weeks, raising my 2 grandkids, Ren and Theo, pretty much solo. Ren was 8, Theo was 5. Good kids. The kind who ask the questions grown-ups don't expect and clock way more than adults give them credit for. I worried about my girl constantly. I tried to be there without hovering, because hovering just pushes grown children straight into bad decisions out of sheer stubbornness. Anybody with adult kids knows that one. Do you have one? Tell me in the comments. Which is exactly why I kept quiet when Dean Whitfield showed up. And showed up is the right way to put it. He didn't meet my daughter, didn't stumble into her life by chance. He appeared, positioned just right, like a stage prop wheeled into place right before the curtain goes up. Here's the first thing I clocked, and I want you to file it away. Dean always knew exactly which version of himself to hand out depending on the audience. Sweet and attentive with Josie. Playful, steady, reliable with Ren and Theo. Showed up to Theo's little league games even when Josie couldn't make it. Remembered which book series Ren was obsessed with, started calling them his kids within 4 months of meeting them. For months, y'all. With me. Warm, polite on the surface, but underneath all that charm was something I can only call an appraisal. His eyes moved over me the way an estate appraiser sizes up a room. Cataloging, tallying, figuring out what everything's worth. I noticed it the second time we were ever in a room together. Didn't say a word. Just started paying real close attention. Here's the second thing worth knowing about protecting yourself. The moment you say your suspicion out loud, you hand the other person time to adjust and cover their tracks. Suspicion works best when it's private early on. Write things down instead. Log dates. Save messages. Build your paper trail quietly, and let the other person keep on thinking they're invisible. Dean claimed he was a financial consultant. Had a decent apartment in Norwalk, drove a car a little nicer than his stated income should have allowed, and this part mattered, had a social history way too thin for a man his age. No college buddies. No family to speak of. Parents deceased. No siblings. A name or two of professional contacts he'd mention but never once introduced me to. In my experience, folks who've actually lived full lives leave footprints everywhere. Dean left almost none. So I called up a woman I'd known for 20 years through my late husband's old job. Delphine Marsh. Runs a small investigations outfit out of Hartford. Told her everything I'd noticed. She listened, didn't interrupt once, then said, "Rosalind, what you're describing matches a pattern I see a handful of times a year. Give me 3 weeks." 3 weeks later, Delphine called back. What she dug up made my hands go ice cold. Dean Whitfield had operated under at least 4 different names, across 3 different states. In Indiana, he'd married a recently widowed pharmacist, sitting on a life insurance payout of $310,000. That marriage lasted 13 months. He walked off with $85,000 from a joint account and a forged power of attorney. In South Carolina, he'd gotten engaged to a woman managing her elderly mother's finances. That one ended when her brother hired a private investigator. In Rhode Island, charges had actually been filed, then dropped because the victim moved out of state before it went anywhere. Never once convicted. The man was good, like disturbingly good. I sat at my kitchen table a long while after that call. What I felt wasn't panic. It was that strange total clarity feeling like watching fog burn off and realizing the hill you'd been squinting at this whole time was actually a wall. Everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour before. It just meant something completely different now. This man had researched my family before he'd ever said a word to my daughter. He knew about my late husband's pension, knew about the property out in Weston, knew Josie's custody situation, her income, her needs. He picked her the way a predator studies a target, methodically, deliberately, knowing exactly what he was going after. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was cold and useful, and cold anger, I've come to learn, gets a lot more done than the burning kind ever does. I called my estate attorney, Franklin Reyes, and told him straight, "Franklin, I need you to build a wall around every asset I own. And I need it locked down before my daughter's boyfriend figures out what I'm up to." He looked at me and said, "How much time do we have?" "I don't know. So let's move fast." Over the next 6 weeks, Franklin restructured the Weston property into a trust with layered verification requirements. Locked my investment accounts behind authorization protocols nearly impossible to get around without tripping automatic paper trails. Every dollar Dean Whitfield could ever try to argue he had a claim to got quietly, legally, moved way out of his reach. One afternoon Franklin said, "You're not just protecting yourself here, you're setting a trap. I'd call it creating the conditions for accountability." What's the difference? The trap's for him. The accountability's for everybody who came before us. He went quiet a second, nodded, and went back to his paperwork. That was that. Here's the second big thing I want you walking away with. You don't have to wait for something to go wrong before you protect yourself legally. An estate attorney, a financial advisor, a plain honest look at how your assets are structured. These aren't dramatic moves, they're ordinary ones. Most folks skip them because nothing bad's happened yet. That's exactly the wrong time to skip them. Josie and Dean got married on a Saturday in April, ceremony at a vineyard out in Litchfield County. Ren was junior bridesmaid. Theo fell asleep during the vows and nobody said a word about it. I danced at the reception, said all the right things, hugged my brand new son-in-law and smiled big for every photo. Then I went home that night and updated the file I'd been quietly keeping for a year and a half. 15 months into the marriage, Delphine called again. Dean had been making sideways inquiries about the Weston property, using Josie's name at a bank, calling Franklin's office claiming to be a family representative. Every single contact logged. Every attempt exactly the record we needed. 2 months after that, Josie called me at 6 in the morning. Her voice was flat. That particular flat you get after crying so hard the sound just runs out. "Mom," she said, "I found emails." She told me what was in them. Financial accounts she'd had no clue about. Plans written out for what Dean intended to do once he'd secured enough legal standing as her husband. She read me one line. I won't repeat it here. But it wiped out any last shred of doubt I had left about exactly who this man was. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough to make sure he can't touch either one of us." A long silence. Then, "I'm actually glad you didn't tell me sooner. I needed to find it on my own." I held that phone a good long minute after she said it. Genuinely one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Watching someone you love work through something this painful, and knowing I couldn't shortcut a single step of it for her. But she was right. That understanding had to be hers to arrive at. I could protect the walls. I couldn't do her grieving for her. The divorce hearing landed in November. Dean showed up with a sharp lawyer known for going hard after financial claims. Their whole play was obvious. Paint Josie's lifestyle as propped up by family money, push for ongoing support, imply Dean had somehow contributed to asset growth. A reasonable enough strategy, if he'd actually married into an ordinary family. When his attorney laid out what Dean expected to walk away with, I watched my son-in-law lean back and flash that same easy grin. Looked right across the room at me, like this was some kind of victory lap. I held his stare. Didn't blink. I want you to understand what that felt like. Sitting there watching a man who'd spent 2 years eating at my table, playing catch with my grandkids, unwrapping birthday presents from us, smile at the idea of cashing in on my family's work. It wasn't rage. Something colder than that. Something clearer. Pure certainty. When the judge paused to look over a document, I stood up. walked to the front of the courtroom and handed the bailiff a sealed envelope. The lawyer started to object. Judge held up one hand, opened it. Inside was a full summary, put together by Delphine, checked over by Franklin, formatted by a criminal attorney I brought in specifically for this, laying out Dean Whitfield's documented history across 3 states. Real names, real victims, real case numbers. A detective named Ortega had been quietly building a case for over a year, just waiting on one more piece of solid evidence. The marriage to my daughter had handed us exactly that. The judge read for a solid 4 minutes, dead silent. Then he set it down and looked at Dean like a man who just had every one of his suspicions confirmed. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm going to need you to remain in the courtroom." Dean's grin slipped. Took maybe 30 seconds tops. 30 seconds for a man who'd spent years flying under the radar to realize he'd just been completely, permanently seen. Charges got filed that same afternoon. Wire fraud and financial exploitation, spanning multiple jurisdictions. Victims who'd spent years figuring they had no recourse started getting calls from the prosecution team. Dean took a plea deal. 20 years full restitution, $395,000 split across 6 documented victims, including a woman named Marianne Cole out in Indiana, who'd quietly rebuilt her life but never fully got back what she'd lost. The evening that deal got signed, I sat in my kitchen and thought about Marianne, about the woman in South Carolina, about every careful, trusting person who'd let someone in and had that trust used against them with cold, calculated precision. It's a particular kind of grief, grieving on behalf of people who aren't even yours. I hoped in some small way that what we'd pulled off gave them something back. Not the money, not the years, just the knowledge that somebody saw what happened to them and didn't look away. Here's what I really want you to take from all this. People who target families don't walk around looking like threats. They look like answers. They show up right on cue, saying exactly the words you're hungry to hear. The real defense against that isn't suspicion. It's documentation. It's having people in your corner before you ever need them. It's building your protections quietly, without announcing a thing, and trusting your own gut even when you can't yet prove what it's telling you. 6 months after sentencing, I spoke at a financial safety conference up in New Haven. A social worker came up to me afterward and said, "Most people talk about what to do after. You talked about what to do before." "Yep," I told her. "That's the part that actually helps." Josie's doing great these days. Took a new position at a practice with way more reasonable hours. Ren's 12 now, has strong opinions about basically everything. A feature, not a flaw if you ask me. Theo plays soccer Saturday mornings, and I make it my business to be at every single game. Last week he scored his first goal of the season and turned around looking for me in the crowd before he even looked for his own mother. I was there. I'll keep being there. I never wanted a dramatic story out of this. I just wanted my daughter and my grandkids safe. And I wanted the man who'd picked them as his next targets to face the full weight of everything he'd done. Not just to us. To all of them. So if something in your own life is setting off a quiet little alarm you keep telling yourself you're imagining, stop ignoring it. Trust it. Verify it. Protect yourself before you ever need to. The most important move I ever made in this whole thing? I made it quietly. Long before anybody knew I was making it at all.